to our top story. And despite imploring the Lords not to scupper his Rwanda plan, Rishi Sunak has been dealt a blow by unelected peers last night, who voted to back a motion that would delay and even foil all deportations.
And TalkTV can reveal that the Labour peer leading the charge against the bill on the grounds that Rwanda is not safe, Lord Peter Goldsmith, is a barrister who took nearly, get this, £400,000 from the Azerbaijani government, which has been criticised for its own record on human rights.
The difficulty is that the government has already presented a bill to Parliament asking it to make a judgment that Rwanda is safe now. And yet, on the Home Secretary's own evidence, it cannot be so because the measures are not in place and have not been shown to be effective.
Well, Alicia Fitzgerald and Sam Lister are still with us. Alicia, I mean, this man has been in the Lords for 25 years, but not necessarily continuously. My understanding is he took a few breaks from time to time to go and peddle himself as a consultant and a mouthpiece for some rather unsavoury countries and organisations.
Definitely. So Lord Peter Goldsmith, he is a QC. That is a very, very senior lawyer.
Casey.
Sorry,
Yeah,
God goodness me.
We all make those...
I forgot. That's really awful, isn't it?
This
Sorry.
is the pedantry
Casey. He's a KC, formerly a QC though, so there we go. Very, very senior legal role, and he has offered various bits of legal advice, including to the Azerbaijani government. Why is that relevant? Well, because the Azerbaijani government have a seriously bad track record with human rights. They're constantly under fire from various independent human rights organisations, including the Human Rights Watchdog, for various violations of human rights within their own country. The irony here is that yesterday he was the peer who was really leading the charge against the Rwanda Treaty, you guessed it, on the grounds of safety and human rights for migrants. So clearly there's a bit of a mismatch there between those two things.
And arguably one country that is also not safe. By the way, I reject the notion that Rwanda is not safe, but I would accept that Russia isn't particularly safe for a number of people, particularly those who Vladimir Putin doesn't like. They tend to fall out of windows with monotonous regularity. But Goldsmith represented the Sher Bank, which is Russia's top bank, sanctioned by the UK and the US after Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So looks like he took money from that Russian bank as well. And in 2021, you'll never believe this, he took a leave of absence from the House of Lords before the transparency rules came in, meaning he did not have to register any earnings from abroad. Now, talking about being flexible in the way you approach your job, in 2003, when Tony Blair, remember him, was looking for legal backing, legal verification for his planned invasion of Iraq, he went to the aforementioned Lord Peter Goldsmith in the Lords and said, you know, what's the legality of this? And Goldsmith said to him, well, I have a bit of a problem here, Tony. A second United Nations resolution will be required for the invasion to be legal. Now, who knows what happens after that, but by the 7th of March, when Tony was like, come on, I need to invade Iraq, Lord Goldsmith said that actually there was no need for a second resolution and the law invading Iraq was legal. I bet Tony Blair was pleased about that.
Well, it worked out well for him, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
I think perhaps in retrospect, maybe he would have gone for the original advice, but there you go. I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because the House of Lords is absolutely packed, stuffed full of lawyers.
As is the Commons.
As is the Commons, true. But they don't have the government doesn't have a majority in the House of Lords, so it's going to find it's going to be a really difficult time trying to get this Rwanda bill through in the House of Lords. Obviously, what happened last night, this wasn't even the bill, this was the treaty, a separate thing that's linked to the bill, so this wasn't even the start of this big war.
Important to note that.
Yeah.
This is not the Rwanda bill debate.
It's just the precursor, but it's just like it is a taste of what is to come.
Yeah.
And what we saw was an awful lot of whinging and moaning about this bill. Very few people spoke out in support of it. But actually, you know, you had Lord Carlisle, a former independent reviewer of terrorism, but also, important to note, a former leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. And he stood up and said he was very offended about all these people in the press calling him an unelected nobody. So, you know, he's there to make his point, regardless of what we say.
What he said.
No.
Yeah,
Is he someone I've heard of? No.
Yeah, he's certainly unelected. Is he a nobody? Well, I'll let you guys decide. Who is he? Yeah, I mean, so what we're saying is, you know, this guy, traditional opponent of the Tories, you know, he's cropped up again in what you might say is fairly dubious circumstances, leading this very early charge against the Rwanda bill, Rishi's beloved Rwanda bill, which people didn't expect it to come this early. This is merely a formality, isn't it, Alicia? A ratification of the treaty. It's basically you put a tick by on the form and then you continue on. So this wasn't a debate, it was a debate about a debate. and it failed. It fell at the first hurdle.
Do you know what? That's the most concise summary of it I've heard so far. A debate before the debate is pretty much what it was. And it's interesting because the Lords have actually never used this particular parliamentary act that they used in order to block the ratification of this and to delay it. The important thing, though, is that the government don't actually have to listen to the result of yesterday's vote. It's merely just a signal. It just shows that the Lords are not really happy with the bill, and it shows what will come maybe next week when the actual bill is debated.
But my understanding is even if the government decide not to listen to it, it's bought them time to potentially table amendments which could then scupper the whole thing.
Bought them time, but it's also prolonged the whole thing, which has already been such a lengthy process. Well, remember, this whole Rwanda thing started in 2022. It's now 2024. So all this has done is potentially delayed the process. Not that everyone was super, super hopeful that any flights would take off before the election before this, but this is definitely a blow for the government nonetheless.
Does this mean now that, because I spent a lot of time on Friday with only a small amount of success, trying to actually look up or find out when the debate about the Rwanda bill in the House of Lords would actually happen. And what was written down was February the 12th.
Next week.
February the 12th. So I think they might have brought that forward a bit.
Yeah.
But as I say, this is not the debate about the Rwanda bill. This is just long-winded lawyers getting lost in barrister space, isn't it, frankly?
Yeah, it comes back on Monday. That's only second reading, which is just the principle of the bill. And then you go into committee and report stage, which is when they go into the really detailed bit. And in the House of Lords, that can take forever. And so they're thinking Easter at the earliest before this is done. Now, you've got to remember, this is Rishi Sunak introduced this as emergency legislation. I think we're getting a long way from emergency legislation if you're looking at post-Easter, really, for any significant...
Actually, on a general basis, talking about lawyers, you two are both experts in the affairs of Westminster. Do you think that the bureaucratic affairs of state would be dealt with faster and more efficiently if we banned long-winded barristers and their legalese from polluting Parliament with the long-winded nonsense that they come out with? I mean, last week for the Rwanda bill, some SNP MP for Edinburgh stood up. I'm not kidding you. She quoted the 1320 Act of Arbroath. I mean, you know, really, we don't need this legalese, but this is their home territory, isn't it? Long-winded waffling in big houses talking to each other.
I think one of the great arts of parliamentary shenanigans is to learn all these very obscure rules that most normal people don't bother to look at. And that's how you that's what happened in Brexit.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all the Remainers went through all these kind of very arcane rules and used them to delay and frustrate the government of the time. So it's quite a powerful tactic.
And never let it be said that they're going to get anywhere near planet Earth, these people. They exist in their own world.
Alicia, we've given Lord Peter Goldsmith a bit of a seeing to, journalistically. Has he had any response to any of this?
We have approached Lord Goldsmith for a response. He hasn't replied as of yet, but that doesn't mean he's not going to, so we'll keep you updated throughout the day if we get any comment from him.
You don't think he's in Azerbaijan by any chance, do you? Anyway.